Oh my god, so I recorded this video, took me like half an hour, gave all this commentary, and then realized I did all of this shit with my mic off, so instead of redoing it immediately, I went to brunch with friends and they had bottomless mimosas, and also I am cursed with this thing called the Asian glow, which really only affects my face and not my speech, but nonetheless, I'm just gonna record this video now, post mimosas, and just not even bother editing it and just let it rock. Cause, you know, I'm not gonna let a little thing like poor alcohol tolerance stop me from sharing the very best poker knowledge available on the internet. That's right. Brand so strong. So I am joined now with the usual 5 suspects, or instead of the usual suspects, the usual 5 reservoir dogs, and the computer overlord Pluribus. Mr. Pink goes ahead and raises it to 3x from the small blind, which is something that I think that he'll be doing about a third of the time. Why do I say a third? So first off, if you go into Hold a Manager and you filter the action so that it's unopened and we get to Mr. Pink in the small blind, we can see that he V-pips about 2/3 of the time and he raises about 1/5 of the time. But, you know, it's a small sample size, and when you look at all of the good players plus Pluribus, you can see they V-pip 2/3 of the time, they raise about 1/3 of the time, and they fold the other 1/3 of the time. So this is probably what the statistics are going to converge towards if there was a larger sample size for Mr. Pink. Here in the model, I've given Mr. Pink about a 30% opening range. He's usually raising his strong hands, he's mixing up with his aces, queens, 10, so he definitely is going to have a defended check calling range. He's going to be re-raising some of these hands as well. So he's going to be tricky here, and he's going to force the big blind to play somewhat straightforwardly against him, because if the big blind keeps raising whenever the small blind limps in, he's going to get a face full of aces and kings, which is my favorite kung fu movie. So here, jacks raise, and Pluribus is going to head and flat ace 10, probably 100% of the time. Here in position, the stronger Broadway hands, most are just going to be flats and never going to be re-raises because they never want to get blown off their hand, and that's probably going to be true with a lot of the stronger King X and Queen X type hands. And here in this model, I'm having Pluribus 3-bet, a pretty linear range in position, generally going to flat 9s and 8s. So Pluribus flats, and the flop comes Queen 9-8. Definitely a board that is going to favor Mr. Pink, who's going to have more combinations of pocket queens, gonna have a bunch of like Queen 9 and Queen 8 in his raising range, gonna have the Jack 10s, while Pluribus is definitely not gonna have as many combinations of sets because, as I said, he's probably gonna 3-bet his queens, gonna 3-bet some of his 9s, but I guess he can have both his 9s and his 8s here. However, because this is a board that definitely is gonna favor Mr. Pink, he can go ahead and put in a small bet. Now, what is the best strategy for Mr. Pink? Probably a bunch of things. He can bet a quarter of the pot, like 80 to 90% of the time. That's going to be fine. The only reason I'm saying that he shouldn't do it 100% of the time is because he's playing against the robot. Even though if he was playing against a human on this board, it would be very, very reasonable for him to simplify to using a quarter-size bet with his entire range here. But also he could choose between a quarter-size bet and 3/4 of the pot, 3/4 of the pot and checking. There's a bunch of things that he can do here, but putting jacks into a small bet definitely is going to make a lot of sense. And Pluribus says, screw you with your tiny bet on this dry board, let's go for gusto, and puts in the nice fat 4x raise. So we look at the model, and as you can see, if we give the out of position player the quarter bet option, he's going to bet it about 60% of the time. Yay me with good accuracy. The only hands that he really should be checking are like 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, and 7s, usually going to be betting them if he's got hearts. And he can occasionally check a hand that has like a pair and a draw. But if you're playing against a human and Pio says bet 80%, yeah, you can probably just bet 100 and they're not going to be able to do anything against you, or not going to be able to mold their strategy to be perfect against your 80% versus your 100% ranges. Here facing the quarter bet, We can see that ace 10 should be a majority call, and this makes a lot of sense because in general when you have a draw that has showdown value, you really just want to realize a lot of that showdown value and see another street, especially when the bet size is so small. So if you have ace 10 with no heart, this is definitely going to be a majority flat. However, here Pio likes to have a little bit of randomization here and likes to raise when it has the ace of hearts, which makes a little bit of sense because having the ace of hearts blocks a lot of the candidate hands for your opponent to 3-bet the flop with. If you have ace 10 with the ace of hearts, it's much less likely that your opponent is going to have ace jack or ace 10 of hearts himself. This is also probably a spot where, if it was solved down even further, ace of spades, 10 of hearts might just be a call 100% of the time, but these are the limitations of my computer, especially when you're using extremely wide small blind versus big blind ranges. However, here, if you look at the EV difference between a raise and a call, you'll see that with ace of spades, 10 of hearts, it's a very small difference. Facing a raise, obviously got a call with a lot of your pairs, everything that's like a pair and a redraw. There's just actually not that many hands that should be folding except for some of these total airballs that bet the flop. But even a hand like 10-6 of diamonds is going to be calling facing a raise. Jacks with the jacks of hearts is obviously a fantastic call, not only because it blocks jack 10, but it also gives you some combinations of jacks or 10s, which can call and then improve to a straight on a lot of turns. It's really important that you have some jacks and 10s here so that you don't fold on every jack or 10 turn. So jacks calls, and the turn is the 3 of clubs. The 3 of clubs is definitely a card that is going to be better for Pluribus. It doesn't really improve the board coordination, and it's much more likely at this point that Mr. Pink is going to be the more capped player than Pluribus is. And so, not really any reason to lead. Mr. Pink goes ahead and checks, and then Pluribus begins to pile in the money. I really like this sizing, I really like this bet. It blocks ace queen, jack 10. Having the 10 of hearts is an amazing card to block a lot of your opponent's calling range, and just increases the likelihood that your opponent has some kind of hand like queen 5 that called the flop and is now going to be forced to fold the turn. However, jacks with a jack of hearts, way too strong of a hand, has too strong blocker properties against the hand that Pluribus is mostly trying to represent with jack 10, and calling here again still gives more board coverage so that Mr. Pink doesn't always have to fold when a 10 comes off. Mr. Pink calls. Here in the model, when we look at the 3 of clubs turn, Mr. Pink should check his entire range, and here we can see that of the combinations of ace of spades, 10 of hearts that reaches the turn, it's definitely reasonable to put in the large bet. If you have the ace of hearts, 10 of spades, that's an even better overbet because it's just much more likely that you're blocking a lot of your opponent's hands that call the flop and call the turn, like ace queen. So after the big bet, jacks is definitely a call. Interestingly enough, jacks without a heart sometimes is a raise all in here, and I actually wonder how often strong players are occasionally turning their hand into a gutshot bluff here. Whenever you see these kind of spots that disagree with your own intuition and logic, this is a spot where I probably am not shoving jack of spades, jack of diamonds 20% of the time. And considering these different spots and adding them into your game is probably how you are going to accelerate your learning process, because it forces you to think critically about uncommon positions all the time and really question if you're making the best practice. So jacks is obviously going to be a call. And now the river is the 7 of hearts. So when the river is the 7 of hearts, if we compare the out of position EV to the in position EV, 21.25 versus 32.75, we can see that when the heart comes in, definitely going to be a hand, definitely going to be a card that is going to be improving the in position raiser a lot more than the out of position caller. So Mr. Pink should check his entire range. And now, because this board has run out so good, we can see that of the combinations that arrive on the river of ace 10 that have a heart, all of them are now bluffs. You'll see that's also true of all the ace jack, king 10, all of these hands that block either top pair good kicker, straights, and reasonable flushes. all become very strong bluffs by the river. In fact, kind of interestingly enough, Pio actually turns King Queen of Hearts into a bluff here with some frequency. And even though it can occasionally get called with a hand like Queen Jack of Spades, the majority of the time when it gets called, it's going to get called by a straight, a flush, or a set that slow played the flop. If we look at the range explorer here of Villain's calling range, we can see of the 31 combos that call, only 9 of them are worse than King Queen. Facing the river shove, tens is always going to be a call, especially if you have the 10 of hearts, even though you should be calling with all combinations of tens, because you block both Jack 10 and 10-6, which occasionally is going to have a gut shot and have gotten there. When you have jacks, you should always call when you have the Jack of Hearts, because you block both the flush and the straight, and the same thing is true when you have 9-8 with the 9 of hearts, and it's pretty close when you have 9-8 without the 9 of hearts. Same when you have a hand like Queen 9 with no heart. It's very, very, very important to realize here that when you are calling down in this position, it's much more important to have hands that block the opponent's nuts by the river rather than having pure absolute hand strength. For example, on the river, it's much more important to call an all-in when you have the jacks with the Jack of Hearts than it is to call with a pair of aces. It's very important that in your own mind when you are calling here, you are prioritizing calling tens more than you are calling jacks, more than you are calling aces. In fact, interestingly enough, it seems that this model prefers calling pocket tens even over calling top set. So the importance of blockers is much, much more important than the raw hand strength of your hand. So this was the last hand that I'm going to cover from the Pluribus experiment. Thank you guys, everyone, for watching. Thank you from everyone from the AI team. I know Gnome has seen a couple of these, so thank you so much, Gnome, for releasing hands, and I beg you to release more. Thank you for Kevin Wang for originally releasing these in a poker tracker format. Thank you for people in the Discord group who are releasing this in a Hold'em Manager format. So many people had to put in so much hard work to even get to this point where I can analyze these hands, so such big props to all of them. Today is Saturday, August 3rd. I'm going to be featured on the Persuadeo podcast later today. I will put the link down below in this description. And also, my student Ishaan is starting a new poker channel where he is logging his progress through the global mid stakes to the high stakes. He's a really bright guy. Used to be the Rubik's Cube blindfold world champion, which is pretty mind-boggling, and so it's been such an honor to work with him, and it's going to be really exciting to watch him blossom into a really high-stakes crusher over the years. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, please like and subscribe, and as always, good luck, and keep it super spicy.